sound of a radial engine, coughing to life over jungle ambience, birds, distant thunder, the hiss of coral dust. The year is 1943. The Pacific War has settled into something brutal and unhurried. A campaign measured not in miles, but in islands, not in days, but in the relentless accumulation of casualties. The Solomon Islands chain stretches like a broken spine through the southwestern Pacific, and every reef, every mountain, every airstrip carved from the jungle has become a prize worth dying for. In this theater, air power is not a supplement to ground combat. It is the ground combat. Whoever controls the sky controls the sea lanes, the supply lines, and ultimately the ground beneath. Both sides understand this with absolute clarity. And so the skies above the Solomons become an arena, dangerous, violent, and utterly unforgiving. Into this arena flew the men of Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 214. They were not, by any conventional measure, the kind of men the Marine Corps would have chosen to represent itself. They had not trained together. They had not been assigned together. Many had come from other squadrons, replacement pools, and administrative limbo. They were, by the Corps' own estimation, leftovers. They called themselves the Black Sheep, and they would become legends. Cut to close-up of a Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine being inspected on the flight line. Before the men, there was the machine. No honest account of the Black Sheep Squadron can begin without acknowledging the aircraft around which their entire combat philosophy was built. The Vought F-4U Corsair. When Vought engineers submitted their design to the Navy in 1938, they had one overriding objective: to build the most powerful carrier-based fighter that American industry could produce. The solution was audacious. They selected the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp, an 18-cylinder air-cooled radial engine that produced 2,000 horsepower, an extraordinary figure for a single-engine fighter of that era. The problem was that such an engine demanded a propeller of enormous diameter, nearly 13.5 feet, to translate that power into thrust efficiently. A propeller that size would normally require impractically tall and heavy landing gear to keep its blades from striking the deck. The engineer's answer was the inverted gull wing, that distinctive bent wing silhouette that would make the Corsair one of the most recognizable aircraft in aviation history. By cranking the wings downward at the fuselage, and then sharply upward toward the wingtips, they kept the landing gear short and sturdy while still clearing the propeller arc. It was an elegant solution to a mechanical problem, and it happened to produce a shape that looked purposeful and menacing in equal measure. The Corsair was fast. In level flight, it could exceed 400 miles per hour, making it among the fastest propeller-driven fighters in the world at the time of its introduction. It climbed powerfully and dove with terrifying acceleration. Its 6 wing-mounted .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 3 per wing, delivered a weight of fire that could dismantle an enemy aircraft in a fraction of a second. But the Corsair had a temperament. Its long nose, necessitated by the enormous engine, blocked the pilot's forward view during the landing approach, particularly the critical moments when the aircraft was nose-high and descending toward a carrier deck. The landing gear also had a tendency to bounce on contact, an alarming characteristic aboard a moving ship. The Navy, after evaluation, initially declined to deploy the Corsair from carriers. The aircraft was handed instead to the land-based Marine Corps squadrons, who took it to the coral runways of the South Pacific and set it loose. In the hands of pilots who learned its peculiarities and respected its power, the Corsair became what its designers had always intended, a war-winning weapon. The Japanese came to know it by a name that required no translation. They called it Whistling Death, a title earned by the distinctive sound its cooler intakes made at high speed. The name was not affectionate. Archival still photograph a heavy-set man in flight gear, squinting into sunlight, a cigarette at the corner of his mouth. Every effective fighting unit in history has had, at its core, a personality that sets the tone, someone whose example, for better or worse, defines what the group becomes. For the Black Sheep, that person was Major Gregory Boyington, born on December 4, 1912, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Gregory Boyington grew up in a frontier environment that offered few comforts and considerable hardship. His home life was complicated. His parents' marriage was turbulent, and the family moved frequently. He was raised for a significant portion of his youth under the surname Halenbeck before learning, as a young adult, that his birth name was Boyington, a discovery that would, in a practical sense, give him a second chance at a military career. As a young man in Seattle during the early 1930s, Boyington found work as a draftsman at the Boeing Corporation. The work bored him. He was a man constitutionally unsuited to sitting still, to the quiet repetition of drafting tables and schedules. He had always been drawn to risk. Friends from his Idaho childhood remembered him as the boy who would find the tallest tree, the highest cliff, the most precarious beam to walk across. The sky was a natural destination. Boyington applied to the Marine Corps Aviation Cadet Program at Pensacola, Florida, concealing the fact that he was already married with children, a violation of regulations at the time. Under the name Boyington rather than Halenbeck, no record of his marriage existed. He was accepted and proved to be a gifted aviator. But the complications of his hidden family life, combined with a deepening dependence on alcohol, created financial and professional pressures that followed him throughout his early career. By 1941, Boyington was in serious trouble. He owed substantial debts, his marriage was failing, and his standing in the Marine Corps was precarious. When he learned that Claire Chennault's American volunteer group, the famous Flying Tigers, was recruiting experienced fighter pilots to defend China's supply routes against Japanese aggression, Boyington saw a way out. The pay was substantial, roughly 3 times his Marine salary, and the Chinese government offered a cash bonus for each enemy aircraft destroyed. He resigned his commission, signed his contract, and sailed for Asia. His time with the Flying Tigers was a study in contradictions. He was, by multiple accounts from fellow pilots and commanders, a gifted fighter in the air, aggressive, instinctive, and tactically shrewd. On the ground, he was often impossible. His drinking was chronic and sometimes incapacitating. His relationships with superior officers were adversarial. He departed the AVG under a cloud, without formal permission, and found himself stranded in India before making his way home aboard a commercial vessel. Back in the United States, with a country now fully at war, Boyington expected his combat experience to make him an obvious asset. Instead, he found himself frozen out, waiting for a Marine Corps that seemed content to leave him unemployed. He worked in a Seattle parking garage, while the war he wanted to fight proceeded without him. Eventually, in an act that mixed audacity with desperation, he wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy appealing for reinstatement. He reportedly dictated it as a telegram to Washington. Within days, he had his commission back, now as a major. The bureaucratic shuffle that followed was maddening. Boyington was moved from post to post, assigned administrative duties, given every responsibility except the one he wanted, command of a combat squadron. It was not until a conversation with a sympathetic senior officer named Sandy Sanderson that a solution appeared. Boyington would be allowed to assemble a squadron from the available pool of replacement pilots, men without permanent assignments who were waiting to be absorbed into existing units. It was an unconventional arrangement, but the need for fighter pilots in the Solomons was acute enough that the idea received approval. VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, was born. Footage of transport aircraft landing on a crushed coral runway. Men in flight gear descending the ladder. The pilots who assembled under Boyington's command in the late summer of 1943 came from everywhere. New England and Louisiana, California and Florida, the Atlantic Fleet and the Pacific replacement pools. They ranged from veterans who had already seen combat to young men making their first trip to a war zone. What they shared, initially, was nothing more than availability. Boyington wasted no time on ceremony. He was not interested in parade ground discipline or the careful cultivation of a polished military image. He was interested in tactics. From the earliest days of the squadron's brief pre-combat training period, he drilled into his men the fundamental realities of the air war over the Solomons. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0, the dominant enemy fighter they would face, was a remarkable aircraft. Lightweight, with exceptional range and extraordinary maneuverability, it could outclimb and outturn virtually any Allied fighter in a low-speed engagement. American pilots who attempted to dogfight a Zero on its own terms found themselves at a serious disadvantage. Boyington, whose experience with the Flying Tigers had taught him this lesson at considerable cost, was emphatic. Do not turn with a Zero. Do not slow down. Use altitude, use speed. use the diving attack. Hit hard, hit fast, and extend away before the Zero can bring its own advantages to bear. The Corsair, he explained, was built for exactly this style of fighting. Its weight and power made it a superb diving and high-speed platform. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns produced a rate of fire capable of destroying a Zero in a single well-aimed burst. The Japanese fighters were lightly built, a design philosophy that prioritized maneuverability over pilot protection and structural robustness. A burst of American .50 caliber fire could ignite fuel, sever control surfaces, and send an enemy aircraft down in seconds. But only if the attack was initiated from the correct position, above, at speed, with the element of surprise. The squadron adopted a simple name for their formation before they ever flew a combat mission. Boyington's Bastards, a reference to their origins as a collection of unwanted pilots with no formal home. When public affairs officers pointed out that the name would not survive military press scrutiny, a compromise was reached. The squadron became the Black Sheep. Their insignia incorporated the heraldic bar sinister, the diagonal stripe that, in traditional heraldry, signifies illegitimacy, a winking acknowledgement of their unofficial origins that satisfied everyone. Frank Walton, the squadron's intelligence officer, was as important to the Black Sheep's success as any of the pilots. A former Los Angeles police officer, Walton brought organizational discipline and human steadiness to a unit that could easily have become chaotic. He conducted thorough mission debriefings, compiled meticulous records, and, crucially, maintained communication with the families of the men in his care, sending press releases to hometown newspapers across America. He also served as a quiet, stabilizing force around Boyington himself, someone whose character the commander genuinely respected. Sound design, engine roar, radio chatter, the sharp rattle of machine gun fire. On September 16, 1943, the Black Sheep flew their third combat mission and announced themselves to the Pacific War with unmistakable authority. The mission was a bomber escort, protecting American aircraft striking Japanese positions near southern Bougainville. As the formation approached its target, they encountered a substantial force of Japanese fighters. What followed was 30 minutes of concentrated aerial combat across roughly 250 square miles of sky. When it was over, the Black Sheep had claimed 11 confirmed aerial victories and 8 probables. Boyington alone had shot down 5 enemy aircraft in a single engagement. It was a performance that set the tone for everything that followed. Over the next weeks, the Black Sheep flew with consistent aggression and increasing skill. Boyington's tactical philosophy proved itself in the air. His pilots learned to trust their aircraft, trust their formation, and trust each other. The mutual dependence of wingmen, each protecting the other's blind spots while pursuing his own targets, required a kind of trust that could not be manufactured on paper. It had to be built in the air, under pressure, and the Black Sheep built it quickly. By the end of their first combat tour in late October 1943, just 6 weeks of operations, the squadron had recorded 57 confirmed aerial kills and 19 probables. They had lost 4 pilots killed or missing and 2 to injuries. The remaining men rotated out to Sydney, Australia, for rest and recuperation. They returned to the Solomons in November with new pilots filling their ranks and new targets in their sights. The second tour brought the Black Sheep face to face with the most formidable objective in the theater, Rabaul. Situated on the northeastern tip of New Britain, Rabaul was the nerve center of Japanese operations in the southwestern Pacific. The Japanese had developed it into a fortress of extraordinary strength, 5 operational airfields, harbor facilities capable of sustaining major naval operations, and a garrison estimated at over 100,000 troops. Over 400 aircraft operated from Rabaul at the campaign's peak. Taking it by ground assault would have been catastrophic. Instead, the Allied strategy was to neutralize it from the air and bypass it, cutting off its supply lines and rendering it irrelevant. For the Black Sheep, this meant escorting heavy bombers through some of the most concentrated anti-aircraft fire and fighter opposition in the Pacific. It also meant Boyington's beloved fighter sweeps, offensive patrols designed not to protect bombers, but to find and destroy Japanese aircraft wherever they could be located. The sweeps were aggressive, often conducted with numerical inferiority, and they worked because the pilots executing them had absorbed Boyington's tactical lessons completely. During this period, A secondary narrative developed around Boynton personally. The American press had discovered that he was approaching the record for aerial victories held by any United States military pilot. Marine Captain Joseph Foss had scored 26 confirmed kills during the defense of Guadalcanal in 1942 and early 1943, earning the Congressional Medal of Honor and setting a benchmark that represented the highest achievement in American military aviation. As Boynton's personal tally climbed toward that number, reporters gathered at his airstrip after every mission, waiting to learn if this flight had been the one. Boynton was ambivalent about the attention. In a letter to his mother written during this period, he acknowledged that the Japanese were formidable opponents and that breaking the record before his tour ended was uncertain. He expressed the sentiment, characteristically, in terms of earned achievement rather than glory. On the ground, meanwhile, Boynton's personal habits remained a source of friction. His drinking was widely known and occasionally impaired his readiness. Senior officers who disapproved of his lifestyle, most notably Colonel Joseph Smoke, who held administrative authority over the unit, looked for opportunities to remove him. Boynton was briefly placed under restriction after making an unauthorized visit to a general's headquarters to secure permission for a continued combat assignment. He responded by boarding a transport aircraft and returning to combat before his restriction was formally resolved. Long silence, then a single engine, fading. The morning of January 3rd, 1944, was clear over Torrequina, Bougainville. Boynton had not been drinking the previous night. He slept well. He rose early, briefed his men, and led a large fighter sweep toward Rabaul. He needed 2 more aerial victories to tie Foss's record. As the formation crossed the coast near Rabaul, they encountered Japanese fighters in significant numbers. In the combat that followed, Boynton and his wingmen became separated from the main formation and found themselves engaged with approximately 20 Zero fighters simultaneously. Multiple Black Sheep pilots witnessed Boynton shoot down at least one enemy aircraft before his Corsair disappeared from view. No one saw a parachute. No one could account for his wingman either. The returning pilots circled, searched, and found nothing. Angry and grieving, some went back out looking for him. They found no wreckage, no survivor in the water, nothing. By noon, the operational assessment was that Major Gregory Boynton was missing in action. The effect on the squadron was profound. Boynton had been, whatever his personal flaws, the animating spirit of the unit. He had recruited them, trained them, and led them with a style that was entirely his own. Frank Walton, writing to his wife shortly afterward, described Boynton as the finest combat pilot he had encountered, a man whom his pilots were willing to die for, and sometimes did. Rumors multiplied in the weeks that followed. Boynton was hiding in the jungle waiting for rescue. Boynton had taken a submarine home. Boynton's inflatable life vest had been found riddled with bullet holes. None of these stories was confirmed. For over a year, his fate remained unknown. Footage of men dispersing across a coral airstrip, going separate ways. Without Boynton, the Black Sheep continued their second tour into January, and were then disbanded. Their pilots were distributed to other units and new assignments.